how exactly we not just ended up here, but the work that the people have done before us to land us here. So Canada is an amazingly beautiful, incredible country, and we live such privileged, luxurious lives that we take so much of it for granted. So
Exactly.
my as an example, I mean to put a stamp on this, my middle name is Adrian. I'm named after my my uncle Adrian, who was with the Dutch underground during the war. He was ratted out for food, of course, because people have no idea what you'll do when you get hungry. Like people don't
Exactly.
know, and I certainly can't attest to being hungry. You certainly can. So it sounds terrible to be ratted out because you're hungry, but we just don't understand what that
Yeah.
actually means. So in order not to be captured alive, because he tried to hide in a church, he's found out. In order not to be captured alive, he went to the highest part of the church and jumped out to kill himself because he had information that would then put other people's lives in danger.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people wondering, I say, I don't know where Canada is. How about British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And then Prince George, well, we have a big city,
Yeah.
and it's called Vancouver. And so we are 500 miles north or 800 kilometers north of Vancouver. And so, and Prince George is about a city of about 85,000, about 120,000 people in the region. It has lots of forest and lots of nature, lots of rivers. It is the capital, I call it, of northern British Columbia.
Huh.
And we have living in harmony with nature. We have black bears, we have grizzlies, we have caribou, we have deer, we have wolves, you name it, we have them all here and living in harmony. Today, we have a very, very interesting guest. His name is Bert Terhart. And so Bert has an amazing background. He's a lifelong passion for oceans and also oceanography. I'm having difficulty with the word there a little bit. He will tell us all about it. He had a career in academics. However, that was not supposed to be. Software engineering and business drew him away from the formal world of academia. He has created software technical tools used in the healthcare professions in Canada, Great Britain, the United States, and Australia, all over the world. Bert, amazing bio. Tell us all about it. First and foremost, tell us, where are you from?
Well, I grew up in a as far away from the oceans as as you just about can get in North America. So I grew up in a very small town in the southeastern corner of Saskatchewan. So,
Okay.
thousands of miles from the Pacific, thousands of miles from the Atlantic,
Exactly.
thousands of miles from the Arctic, thousands of miles from the Gulf of Mexico, soon to be, I understand, the Gulf of America. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's where I
No
grew up.
kidding, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that's where I grew up. So
So,
that's where I'm from.
right.
Um, my parents were from Holland. They were Dutch immigrants. They came to Canada in the mid '50s and ended up in Saskatchewan. That's where I'm from, and that's how I got there.
So, what part of Holland did they come from?
My father was born in Haarlem.
Okay.
Uh, bombed eventually. His father was in the Dutch Merchant Marine.
Okay.
Basically, my on everyone on my mother's and father's side was in the Dutch Merchant Marine. They ended up in Rotterdam, bombed out of Rotterdam during the war. Ended up in Amsterdam. My father, and they ended up being forcibly moved out of where they were living to a house that was in Holland. Of course, everything is vertical and houses are small, so they lived in a three-story houses. My dad lived on this side, and my mom lived on the other side. So that's how they met.
Okay. And so they met in Rotterdam, you said, or in
Amsterdam.
Haarlem?
No,
Amsterdam.
sorry, Amsterdam.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, that's interesting because I was born in Holland,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and I was born in 1940 in
Uh-huh.
Holland in a place called Sappemeer in the province Groningen.
Oh,
And
Groningen. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
10, 15 kilometers from the Dutch border.
Mhm.
Obviously, I have memories about the war. my mom and dad, I'm going to just start with that a little bit because it makes the connection better
Hmm.
between you and me, is that my mom and dad, they fell in love in 1938, and my dad had a career in the forest industry, and they rented a beautiful place in Sapamere. Very quickly had a boy and a girl,
Hmm.
and then in 1940, obviously Hitler decided or
Hmm.
1939 to invade Poland, and then that was followed with the threat of him invading the Blitzkrieg into the Western Europe. And so
Hmm.
my dad was called into the Dutch army
Hmm.
in April of 1940. And for 5 years, they would not know if he lived or died. The last time that they saw him is in the bombing of Rotterdam.
Hmm.
And obviously, thousands of people died in that episode. And for 5 years, my mom was on her own, trying to
Hmm.
survive with two kids. And then she was pregnant with me, and I was born November the 1st, 1940.
1940. Wow.
Yes, but
Well,
I still remember, I remember from the time that I was 3.5 years old, even now still remember hundreds of planes,
hmm
bombers overhead that were bombing the northeastern part of Germany,
hmm
and the cities Wilhelmshaven, Bremen,
yeah.
Hamden, Hamburg, and my mom would take us outside on a flat roof behind our house because she felt safer outside than inside. And in the
hmm
distance, we saw the skies being red of the cities on fire. That's the
Yeah.
first thing that I remember. And then
Hmm.
we were liberated by the Canadian Army,
hmm
and obviously the Canadian Army, part of the Allied forces that landed summer of 1944 in Normandy. The Canadians moved through France, Belgium, the western part of Holland, and they
hmm
pushed the Germans through the north back to Germany. And we were about 15 minutes from the border. Things got pretty rough where we were, and I saw far too much that we should not have seen. And
Yeah.
1944 in particular was very difficult. There was the hunger
hmm
year, and so between my sister, my brother, 1 year and 2 year older than me, and myself, every morning we would go into the railroad yards with gunny sacks and pick up anything edible and burnable. And the
hmm
winter of 1944-45 was the coldest one on record. And I
hmm
can still feel, even now, 80 years later, I can feel the feeling of hunger and cold. And then we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. And it made such an impression on me as a 5 year old that I always knew from that point forward I would go to the land of my heroes,
hmm
Canada. I tried to go when I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me. I was then drafted into the Dutch Air Force for
Yeah.
2 years, and then I emigrated to Canada when I was 23, and wanted to go to Western Canada, to British Columbia, and the dream that I had, other than going to Canada, is to build a lumber mill.
Hmm.
And and so when I came, I couldn't speak the language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job. So when I came to Vancouver, I went to the immigration department. And fortunately, there was a German fellow. I could speak some German. Told him what I wanted to do. He said, "Go to Prince George."
yeah.
1965. That is 60 years ago. And I can still see from here where the Greyhound station is and
hmm
where I arrived with a suitcase, three books, two sets of clothes, and I had I counted my money at least three times. I had $25.47.
Wow.
But what I did have is attitude. Always have had a positive attitude. I
hmm
have passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. Work ethic. I work harder than anybody, and still do that today. Even at 84, I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning, and then I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. and
Yeah, yeah.
and so that's a,
Well,
and I do have a mill and 10 other companies and all the other kinds of things, but that's,
well, okay.
something
So,
different.
there's lots of that story that rings very similar to me.
Yeah.
For example, my uncle was in the Dutch artillery
Okay.
when the Germans invaded,
Right.
and he manned a heavy machine gun while the Germans were landing at the airport in Rotterdam.
Right.
so so there's
Can
a
you imagine?
connection there. So
Yeah.
I mean, a very very close connection.
Right.
He was yeah he was captured by the Germans at that time, disappeared into the prisoners of war camp, and was eventually he survived the war, unlike
He was lucky.
a very many others. And what my father there was a father was born in 1928, so he was a bit older than you.
Right.
But he remembers, in particular, there was an Allied bomber that was shot down that landed in the northern part of Amsterdam. He was living very near the palace on the Amstel River,
Right.
well, the Amstel Dike, I should say, more
Yeah.
correctly. And for a long time, no one really knew uh, what that plane was, who the crew were, or anything like that. It was recently excavated. Found out that there was, of course, it was a Canadian plane, or not, of course, but it was a Canadian plane with a Canadian crew.
Right.
And it so happened that the one of the crew members, the waist gunner, which and what stuck out in my father's mind is this waist gunner fired his gun all the way at the Flocky Wolf that was on its tail, that was shot it down, firing it all the way into the ground.
Wow.
And it turns out that the waist gunner lived about he was from a small town, which is maybe he was from Chemainus, actually, which is just a short, it's like a stone's throw from where I live. And it's a stone. My father retired in Victoria, again, not very far from here, maybe 100 kilometers. And so the last Remembrance Day, we took my dad up to the Legion where this guy was a member of, and here was his name. And so my father was there to say, I am the last person to see this man alive. I can tell
My
you
God.
exactly what happened to that plane. I can speak specifically to the bravery of this man who, was destined for a horrible fiery death, but just refused to quit.
Is your
So
dad still alive, Bert?
no, my father passed away last in February. He was
Oh yeah,
96
sorry
years
to
old.
hear. So
Yeah.
96, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
he was a very he was like you. He was up early in the morning. He was
Right.
never late for anything.
No.
He was as sharp as a tack. So yeah, he was an amazing man, and not unlike you. In his first job in Canada, when he arrived, um, he uh, against his parents' wishes, just like yours, he left a very lucrative, prestigious career in the Dutch Marine. He was a first officer destined to be a captain, and so you turned his back on all that and came to what he felt was the most beautiful country in the world and the most beautiful place in the world, which was the west coast of Canada, because he'd sailed all around the world. He'd been to
I
all
still
those.
believe that even today in this
Yeah,
minute.
yeah, same. So
Yeah.
he came to Canada with. So his father said, "Well, you need a job. I can get you a job because I have a friend of a friend who's a friend." So my father's first job was painting a house in Regina, Saskatchewan, and
Right.
within a day, he had applied for a job with the Department of Natural Resources and the Geological Survey of Canada, and within a week he'd been offered both jobs, and he took the first one that came across his plate. It's not the one he wanted. He wanted to work for the Geological Survey, not for the Department of Natural Resources. But DNR gave him a job just about right out of the box, and they shipped him off to Uranium City, which is at right on the border between Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories, in the middle of
Exactly.
nowhere.
Yeah.
But he just had the same work ethic that you did. It's something that we're sadly missing today, is that he just put his head down and said, "This is what's on my plate, and I'm going to do it. And I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to do it better than anybody."
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a rare commodity these days, it appears. And so when I was in the Air Force, I was in the Air Force Special Forces and security, and so I don't know why, but that's where they put me. And so then one of the things that we did is they were gaining the land from the North Sea or the inland sea, IJsselmeer.
Hmm.
They were draining it, and it was
Yeah.
getting to the point that, as you already know, during the bombings that the Allied forces did, they tried to fly over water as much as they could to
Mhm.
avoid flak from guns. So there were a lot of planes, or quite a number of planes that had ditched on the
Hmm.
IJsselmeer, and
Hmm.
so we were. And the first experience that I had is with planes that were uncovered in the IJsselmeer, and that were, in a lot of cases, the remains were still inside the planes. It was quite an experience for,
Hmm.
I was only 18 at a time when I
Hmm.
went into the Air Force. And by the time I saw this kind of stuff, it was in my 20s. But it's quite a shock. But there is such a history about, a lot of people do not appreciate how
Yeah.
lucky we are
Yeah.
living here, doing all
Yeah.
the things that we're doing. I do a lot, you do a lot, and I fly around. I always sit by the window and I look outside. It's paradise. It
Yeah.
is paradise. And
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have to do is look around the world, look at the Ukraine, look at the Middle East, look at Venezuela, Cuba, again, China, Russia, on and on and on and on.
Hmm.
We are living in paradise here, and with all the opportunities and all the things that we can do here, it's so unique.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's driven a lot of it has driven me just about almost my entire adult life is to have a greater appreciation of exactly how exactly we not just ended up here, but the work that the people have done before us to land us here. So Canada is an amazingly beautiful, incredible country, and we live such privileged, luxurious lives that we take so much of it for granted. So
Exactly.
my as an example, I mean to put a stamp on this, my middle name is Adrian. I'm named after my my uncle Adrian, who was with the Dutch Underground during the war. He was ratted out for food, of course, because people have no idea what you'll do when you get hungry. Like people
Exactly.
don't know, and I certainly can't attest to being hungry. You certainly can. So it sounds terrible to be ratted out because you're hungry, but we just don't understand what that
Yeah.
actually means. So in order not to be captured alive, because he tried to hide in a church, he's found out. In order not to be captured alive, he went to the highest part of the church and jumped out to kill himself because he had information that would then put other people's lives in danger.
Yeah.
So he survived. He survived the fall.
He
The
did. Oh.
Germans thought he was dead because
Oh.
they just looked at him and said, "No one's going to make it." So the underground then hid him in an insane asylum for the remainder of the war. And his wife, of course, thought he was dead. His whole family thought he was dead. No one could be told that
He
this
had
man,
to be, right?
he had to be dead.
Yeah.
So can you just, I mean, think about that for a minute. Think of the impact that has on your family, the people you care about, your community, everything. Think of the forces that would drive you to do those kinds of things. It's incomprehensible, and yet we take all of that for granted. We just blow it off. It's like, oh well, you know what? None
And
of it.
and
It's just
that's the point that I'm making as well as saying you don't know how lucky
yeah,
you are. Is
exactly.
and
Yeah.
when people are bitching and complaining about this is wrong and that is wrong and
Mhm.
this is wrong, so now I know you live close on a little island just off the coast of British Columbia. So
Yeah.
we have a place. I spend my weekdays here, and then
Hmm.
Friday afternoon we have a place in North Saanich,
Okay.
and so we have a house there, and we have a farm, a 50-acre farm there,
Hmm.
close to the airport, close to the ferries, and
Hmm.
I've had that for 20 years because if I'm here, I work 24/7.
Yes.
And I can't get away from the mill and all the other things that I do, and that takes me physically away
Yeah.
from here. You know,
Yeah. I think people that's really an important part. I mean, it's an important part to realize because we live in a world that's where we're connected 24/7. And for entrepreneurs like you, for entrepreneurs like me, that just want to work all the time, it's almost impossible to disconnect, which is an absolute necessity if you're going to remain functional. And
exactly,
if you're supposed to be in charge, if you're running the show, then you better be functional. Otherwise, things are going to go south.
exactly.
So my father would say, if things are going bad, you don't fire the janitor. So so
Yeah,
so you
exactly,
you it I love hearing the fact that you have a place that you go to that you can actually where you can literally shut off in some way, shape, or
exactly.
form. And for me, that's a sailboat. Like that's why I'm still sailing. That's why I've sailed my whole life. I need a place where um where I can shut off, where my mind just stops working naturally. I don't have to force it to stop. And getting on a sailboat is the way that I do that. And it's different for everybody. And I think it's although we sort of brushed past that point, I think it's an absolute necessity in this day and age to find a place to unplug.
But you didn't just sail, you
No,
sailed 45,000 miles
yeah,
around the world. So that is far beyond. But I just want to make sure that people don't think, oh, there's a sailboat, blah, 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 blah. They're going, no, no. This is serious stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
tell us about that.
Well, this is interesting because there's something about, and I'm going to say this. This going to sound horrible, but I mean, I can say it because I have some Dutch heritage. That there's something about my dad did everything with a purpose, and there was the Dutch community around Estevan. There were farmers. There were people, business people. They did everything with a purpose, and I just thought the whole world worked like that. I thought everyone worked, and I maybe that's not the case. I can say that with a smile.
Yeah.
So when I go sailing, I sail with a purpose. I'm not just going out there to to wander aimlessly around and end up whichever way the wind is blowing. I've always sailed with a very definite purpose. And if you decide to sail solo nonstop around the world, like I did, I mean that's sailing with a that's the epitome of doing anything with a purpose. It's actually one of the hardest things to do in the whole world. It's way well to give you some example because we're going to put a stamp on sailing solo nonstop around the world. 6,000 people have climbed Everest.
Right,
600 people have been in space.
right.
300 people have sailed nonstop around the world solo, and 9 people have done it with just a sextant. And I'm the ninth.
What is the
So
sextant?
it's that device that it's a very simple instrument that measures the height of a celestial body relative to the horizon.
Okay,
So it's how people navigated before the age of GPS or electronic navigation. It's how people navigated around the world. It's how Cook, La Perouse, Quadra, Bodega de, Bodega de Quadra, Champlain, LaSalle, Fiddler, Thompson, Mackenzie. The list goes on and on. It's how all of Canada was mapped. Everything that you see in the map of Canada was first put on there by someone with a sextant. So it's how my father navigated around the world using a sextant. It's how Cook went around the world. It's how its predecessors were the quadrant, and then there's the back staff. There's all kinds of things that people were using to try to measure the height above the horizon. So, I mean, very very simply, for example, in North America, you can look at the height of the North Star of Polaris
right,
in terms of its angle above the horizon and tell exactly what latitude you're at. So it's very easy to tell where you are north or south in the world by using the stars. It's and it's almost impossible to tell how far east or west you are because that's a matter of the clock. So when people figured out how to tell how far east or west they were, it's why Columbus thought he was in India when he landed in the Caribbean, leaving from Europe. It's why
right,
the Lachine Rapids in Montreal they were named by Cartier because he thought he was in China. Lachine is the French word for China. Didn't know how
right,
far east or west he was.
right,
So when people figured that out, the guy who did it was Harrison. Basically, he did it using a clock. His story is amazing, but anyway, so when that happened, the world of mapping, cartography, measuring the oceans, just exploded, and it exploded in Canada, of course, at the same time that it exploded around the world. And Canada, because we live in this incredibly vast, very difficult, very harsh country, is incredibly hard to survey and
yeah,
map. So the
yeah,
mapping expertise that was developed in Canada at the same time that Cook was sailing around the world, Bligh was sailing around the world, Vancouver was sailing around the world, all these guys. You have Champlain, I'm sorry, you have Mackenzie from the Mackenzie River, you have David Thompson, Thompson River, you have Peter Fiddler, you have Turner, you have the Hudson's Bay Company, and these people were engaged in literally just mapping. And if it had not been for those people, and then of course the contributions by Indigenous peoples in this country, Canada would not be what it is today. Full stop.
right. Unbelievable,
Yeah.
really. So, in terms of Yeah, that goes somewhat beyond me because some people say to me, I ask a question saying, "How do I find this place?" And they say, "Well, you go to the east, and then you go so much to the west or the north." And I have no idea about that. So the other question that I have is, how long? So did your dad also sailed around the world?
He went around the world as a merchant mariner. So he went
Right,
around on a big ship.
right.
Yeah, big ship. But he as you at the time, at the time that out right after the war, there was the Dutch East Indies, there was
Yeah,
Jakarta, all these places that, and there was this massive amount of trade that went from Europe to the to the to India, to the Dutch East Indies, Singapore, all those places, and there was the Dutch had a very large presence in the merchant marine globally, and that's what my father did. Sailed everywhere, went all around the world on a merchant ship.
so indirectly, your love for
Hmm.
the water and the oceans and the world and is that indirectly because of what your dad did
Yeah,
and your proximity to that?
yeah, yeah. It's a direct result of that. My father, he as we alluded to, he was bombed out of Rotterdam,
Yeah.
and they sent him the company that my grandfather worked for, SMN, which is I can't pronounce it, the Dutch name I don't even know, but it stands for the Nederland Steamship Company, so
Okay.
SMN. And they sent him to live on their facility in the middle of Amsterdam Harbor, which was an island. So my father rowed and sailed to school. That's every every the only time he could go to school, because schools were closed all the time, and of course they were rounding up boys of his age to go work in labor camps. So it
Exactly.
wasn't just, oh, we're going to go to school today. It wasn't like that at all,
No.
as you well knows. But he just grew up on the water. He just grew up, and his father took him sailing all the time. That's how they got from A to B. My father remembers sailing with a load of potatoes, going off into the country to try to get food, because they lived in the city. The only place to get food was to go to the country.
Exactly.
Getting in a small boat, just trading whatever they had for potatoes, and then sailing past all the German patrols when they weren't supposed to be in a place that they weren't supposed to be, but hoping and praying that they would just keep going and not stop, sort of thing. So, but it was part of his life.
Yeah.
So I grew up. My father, we were always sailing. We were always in a boat of some description. My father was never very far from water, even though living in I learned to sail, for example, in a on a reservoir that there was a small dam. They dammed a small creek, they being the Saskatchewan Power Authority, so that they could have cooling water for a coal-fired electric plant.
Okay.
And I learned to sail on this, basically on this puddle. But I mean, all summer long, that's all we did. We would try to put a sail on a canoe, on a log. I once tried to sail my brother. I think it was just so. It's not an indirect result; it's a direct result of my father's love for the ocean.
So when you sailed solo around the world, how long did it? So where did you start, and how long did it take?
Okay, so I started in Victoria.
Okay.
Um, I left October 26, 2019, right before COVID. It took me 265 days.
Well,
So you leave Victoria and then come back to Victoria. So you go um, you go basically straight south, as it were, to the bottom of America. So Cape Horn,
right.
go across the South Atlantic to the bottom of Africa, Cape Hope and Cape Gulas. Go across the Southern Indian Ocean until you're south of Australia, so Cape Lewin. Then you go south of Tasmania, which is uh, Southeast Cape, and then you go south of New Zealand, South Cape, and then you sail up the Pacific back to Victoria. So yeah, it's not exactly it's sailing with a purpose. That's probably a good way to put it.
Yeah. So, and this was not like you're into it now for about 10 days and say, you know something? I thought this was going to be better than this, so let's turn around and go back.
Yeah,
Or it was not saying, oh, where's my cell phone here? It is, hey, hello, how are you doing? No, this is solo.
yeah. This is solo. There's no cell phone communication. My single sideband radio packed it up about 1,000 miles west of Baja California. So what I did have, I wasn't allowed any electronic navigation whatsoever. But what I did have was a small satellite tracker, so people could, if something went wrong, people could say, "Well, I guess Bert died there." That would be about
Yeah.
it, because
Yeah.
the nearest person to you is was literally on the International Space Station, 200 miles that way.
Yeah.
So there's no help coming, and you're sailing in a part of the world that's the shipping lanes are nowhere near there, because they just don't go through. Well, there's nothing down there to go to begin with, and secondly, the ocean, it's the most extreme environment in the world, not not just not just the land environments, because as soon as, I mean, the Southern Ocean is something wild. I mean, everyone has this idea about Cape Horn, and Cape Horn isn't anywhere near the worst place. So you can imagine what people's ideas are. So it's so I had a satellite tracker. That was it.
Right.
So people would know where I was, and I was able to send emails back via this very low resolution bandwidth connection. So that was my connection to the world, was this very stilted, email thing.
So what was was this what you imagined it would be, or were there some challenges that you say I did not anticipate that it would be this difficult
Oh, it's
at this
it's
point?
well, I mean, I don't want to say it's beyond hard, because obviously, I got back, and you don't sail around the world, you sneak around the world. My hope was that I actually got around the world before Mother Nature found out where I was and what I was doing, and then, and taught me a proper lesson. So
Right.
it's an incredibly humbling experience. It is difficult. That's why so very, very few people have done it, because you have to,
Yeah.
firstly, you've got to be incredibly lucky. So
Yeah.
I was incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
And secondly, the boat, it's easy to sail the boat to bits. That's not hard. You can just clap on all the canvas you want and just put your head down, and pretty soon the boat will just destroy itself,
Yeah.
because it's a machine. It's like any car. You just stomp on the gas pedal, and pretty soon and don't care about anything else, and pretty soon you're going to run into a problem. So it's unbelievably hard. But I think the best way might be to summarize it is that, I would say in general, that it's okay to be scared witless. You just can't be scared shitless. So
Right.
so,
Yeah.
so you have to be functioning all the time, in no matter the pressure. And it's in that way, it's not like, it's no different than being a leader in the army. Like, I was a platoon commander in the Canadian Special Service Force. So you have to be able to, a good way to, I think of it is, because we use the word pivot all the time. You
Right.
hear it all the time, but you have to be able to pivot under pressure. It's easy to pivot when there's nothing at stake.
Right.
It's very hard to pivot when everything is at stake. Like,
Yeah.
if you're an entrepreneur starting out, or it's everything you own, everything, the people that work for you, your family, you've got everything mortgage, whatever. So that's hard when you got, okay, I got to change
Right.
direction because this ain't working. That
Yeah.
gets hard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the other part that I found that, as you say, a career in academics, however, was
Yeah.
not to be. So you had an amazing background, Bert,
Hmm.
and studies that you did, and all the knowledge that you have. So what did you do with that now? Are you still
Hmm.
falling back on that? Are you still, and especially in the area of health and wellness and
Hmm.
fitness and all those other things? So, what are you doing now going forward?
Well, I think that, uh, I'm I've always played sports. Well, when I was younger, I played sports at a very high level, and it wasn't because I was particularly motivated. It just seemed to be, it was, I had a affinity for that. So I learned at a very young age. I learned that it was important, or I learned that it was, you could be rewarded in ways that you cannot imagine going forward, if your body was able to function at a very high level. So when you play sports at a high level, your body just has to function at a high level.
Right.
And that was amplified when I was with the Special Service Force, because all we did was train. And you expect your body had to perform in ways and in conditions under which you just cannot possibly imagine. I mean, everyone has seen, in this day and age, has seen the kind of training that the Navy SEALs go through, the kind of training that the Green Berets go through, or the special boat service for the Brits, or the Special Air Service, and or the forward air traffic controllers, which are probably the hardest job in the world in the military. Anyway,
Yeah.
those people, they demand of course they demand an incredible amount from of their bodies, but also of their minds. So
Right.
there's this training that happens on both sides. So I've been lucky enough to be exposed to both those things. Firstly, you know, as I said, in sports, I played rugby and hockey, which is not, you know, kind of tough sports. Certainly rugby. And then in the army, it's all about, you know, your mind will just drive you as far as you can possibly push it. So and that stood me well in academia because that's a mindful exercise. And in order for your mind to function at a very high level, your body has to keep up. And I've always drawn on those two sort of widely disparate sort of experiences to stay, you know, to stay pretty fit. So, for example, I'm 60. I just turned 66. When I was 64, I paddled across Canada in a canoe by myself, solo, which meant I walked, pulling the 200-pound canoe behind me in a cart for 1,100 kilometers. I
My
walked
God.
through the mountains in British Columbia, pulling a canoe behind me over the Continental Divide in wintertime to get from the Columbia River watershed to the Saskatchewan River watershed. And
Has anybody ever done that?
I'm the second person to do it solo
Oh
in a single
my
season.
God.
And the first guy who did it, his name is Mike Ranta. You'd love Mike Ranta. He's just such a character. But he did it when he was, I think, you know, 38 or something. He was, I guess, by some standards, he's old, but he did it with a dog. So whenever I talk to Mike, I always kid him because he said he went with his best friend, which I said, well, that's not possible. You can't possibly do it alone if you went with your best friend. So,
No.
but you know, I don't. I mean, I can't. Mike is just an absolute beast. I can't compare to Mike. But
So how old were you, Bert, when you did that?
64.
Yeah, so yeah, that is an unbelievable
Yeah.
achievement. So
What's interesting about that it just is that I was talking about this trip. I was giving a talk about this trip, and I finished it in 2022. And then someone came up after me and said, "Well, you know, what have you done since?" And I looked at him kind of strange because this was in October when I gave this talk, and I just finished in September. And I said, "Well, I just got back a month ago." And he said, "Well, you said you did it in 20, you know, when you were 22." I said, "No, I finished when I was in 2022." So he thought I did it when I was 22, and I'd been riding my laurels for the last 42
yeah,
years.
no kidding, eh? So the foundation for all these amazing things that you did
Hmm.
were the hard times along with your dad and his dad
Yeah.
and hearing from that that developed you as an individual
Hmm.
as to say for me I say a lot of times I struggled with at a difficult time. PTSD was part
Hmm.
of my life, obviously, because of the war years. Saw far too much that we should not have seen.
Yeah.
And then the inner child part was, I got counseling for that in my 50s, actually. Very
Hmm.
emotional, the fear of losing that one parent. And then, but I had challenges with who am I? you
Hmm.
know, and
Yeah.
but made me go here to Canada. Obviously, I developed the dream of going to the land of my heroes,
Hmm.
but academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times.
Hmm.
And then they said, so by then I was about 12 and a half years old. But what are we going to do with this guy? So they told my parents, well, maybe put him in a school for the mentally challenged individuals. Who said, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So let's teach him a trade. And my dad had been in the lumber, and my
Hmm.
grandfather was a master carpenter. And so they sent me at 12 and a half to work as a laborer in a furniture factory.
Hmm.
And kids can be hard on each other.
Yeah.
Where I had friends, in grade 7, most of them went on to college and university. I became a laborer. I'm
Hmm.
proud of that today, but then it was kind of looked down on.
Yeah.
But I always knew inside of me that I was just as smart as the other guys and girls, and so and so I looked then forward to going to Canada. Start out with nothing, and the dream of building a mill. Didn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. I wanted to go to British Columbia and then start from the ground up. But
Hmm.
what changed my life really is that going to Canada. But the other part that happened to me is that I already was here for 32 years in Canada in 1997 when I
Hmm.
walked into a bookstore here and I picked up a book. And I still, the book is this one actually that I picked up that changed my life. And the title of the book was Driven to Distraction.
Hmm. I know that book.
You know the book,
Hmm.
and it was written by Dr. Hollywell, medical doctor, professor, has written 18 books, and he is dyslexia and ADHD.
Yeah.
I had never even heard about ADHD, and
Hmm.
I said, "Oh my God, that is me." So I wrote in the book, and I'm sure you could read it if you saw it. But basically, what I said, this book is January 1997, and I wrote in Dutch, now I finally know who I am.
Hmm.
And it changed my life. And the more I found out about ADHD, and then it kind of became clear to me. I was always good at numbers, and I
Yeah.
was good at writing, but not at reading. And
Hmm.
so I failed the classic educational system,
Yeah.
and so but I learned a lot on my own. And then when I came here, and I already was successful here, I had already built a mill to a certain extent, but I still had that feeling inside of me,
Yeah.
why am I different? and
Yeah.
and so that book changed me and changed
Hmm.
my life. And then so by then I was already 57 years old when I found that book. And then it took me 5 years to go to my doc, who was a personal friend, had
Hmm.
delivered our two daughters,
Hmm.
and he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and I do. And the more I found out about it, is that it's a superpower. And
Oh
and
yeah.
and
Yeah.
so and
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I started to understand that, and the frequency of occurrence much higher, in my
Yes.
opinion, than it
Yes.
was. So now the other part that is interesting about it, Bert, is that Dr. Halliwell, that is has is globally known, has written many books about it. You are my podcast number 362. 203 podcast on the Brink is an interview with Dr. Halliwell.
Wow. 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 That would have been fantastic. Jeez.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Amazing individual. And so,
Oh, he
but
has to be. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Gosh.
so what I suggest, he's the expert, and I live it obviously, and it was an amazing interview. And so, and I suggested to him, from my experience, I initially thought maybe 8% of the population, but it's much higher than that. I
Hmm.
suggested maybe around 20%. He said, "No, John, more than 25%
Yeah.
are ADHD, both male, female. Females presented usually different than males."
Hmm.
And then the other part that I found, I've been in business and board of directors and all the other things that I do in business. I met a lot of successful people.
Yes.
And I believe, I suggested to Dr. Halliwell, that from my experience, I believe that the successful entrepreneurs and business people and thinking entrepreneurial, that probably 50% of them are
Hmm.
ADHD. He said, "No, John, probably 75%.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm smiling and shaking my head, and because that's exactly been my experience. Like I've been very fortunate to work with what I call highly functioning individuals. You cannot succeed in an extreme environment unless you're a highly functioning individual. And we think differently about extreme environments, but being an entrepreneur is you are voluntarily placing yourself in an extreme environment where everything that you know and love is at risk just about every single day while you're trying to make this crazy thing work, because everything inside your head is telling you no, everything outside your head, which is everyone else, is telling you no, but you're going to do it anyway. Like coming to Canada with $25.47 and building a mill, you're going to do it anyway. So here's an example that's in your mold. Someone in my generation, the most successful software engineer that I know personally. is a guy by the name of David Beresford, who's completely ADHD. He's right off the scale. So this guy's his uncle, this guy was swimming in the deep end of the gene pool because his uncle was knighted by the queen, you know, passed away queen, because he was the engineer in charge of the channel. So this guy, his marks in high school were 0 or 100. He failed high school, even though his mother was a teacher and his father was a professional engineer traveling around the world building things like pulp mills and giant chemical mills, 100 million, $200 million projects. David refused to, like, he had no social skills at all. He refused to do anything in high school because the teachers would get mad at him because he wouldn't write the test and show up in class, and he'd force him to write a test. He'd get 100 and say C and then leave. But he couldn't write two things. But anyway, so he ends up running this. He's the co-founder and co-owner of a company called Pandel in Calgary that they employ probably close to 300 people now, and it's nothing but software. David has written just about every single piece of software in that company, and yet he doesn't have a high school education. So that's my other friend is Dr. Michael Lyon. He runs the largest medical clinic in Canada, and I do all the. We've been friends since we were in grade 3 together in Estevan, Saskatchewan. His father never finished high school. His father was completely dyslexic. Mickey is completely and totally ADHD. He cannot add 1 plus 1 equals 2. He needs a I'm not kidding. He needs a calculator to do it. And yet he's this brilliant research physician who's managed just to pound his way through the system. So he has written more books, has more letters after his name than you can imagine. He's wildly successful, and he's the most interesting cat you could talk to. But anyway, he's in the same, out of the same cut of the cloth as you, and you absolutely have to have. And I guess I give those two examples because Mick, Dr. Michael Lyon, I call him Mick. He just about failed out of high school. They just about kicked him out of medical school. He just refused to go away because he was just, there's a voice inside your. So I guess to wrap this up, I suppose, and I'll say this, I've said this 1,000 times if I've said it once. You need one single yes in your life to accomplish anything in just about anything in the world. Like, I'll never be a professional basketball player. I'm not tall enough, or a hockey player. I'm not good enough. So of course we have physical constraints, but beyond that, if you can find that one yes, then and you're a perfect case in point. Then you're good to go in every way in every way, shape, and form you can imagine, in every context that you can believe. And the yes, you have to give yourself permission for that yes. No one else. You can't tell me, hey Bert, you got this. It's not good enough. I actually have to give myself literal permission to say yes. And that's almost impossible to do because there's another voice inside your head that says all the time, that runs 24/7, that says no. It just says no, no, no. It says you're too, you're too short, you're too tall, you're too old, you don't have
Whatever.
enough money, you're too bald. It doesn't matter. And that voice will never go away. And you need to learn with that. You need to learn how to silence that voice. And there's specific ways to do it. I'm sure that you know of ways to tell that voice to go pound salt.
Yeah,
And if you
sometimes
can,
it takes effort to do that.
oh my God,
But
you
the yes will always succeed, but it
yeah,
sometimes takes longer than
oh
you
yeah,
want it to take, right?
oh yeah,
So, yeah,
it's the long game. So
yeah.
give you a good example of the power of that no. Leonardo da Vinci, on his deathbed, exclaimed that he felt his life was a failure. He had fallen short of the mark because he had wasted his God-given talents on works that were not up to snuff. Now, can you imagine Leonardo da Vinci
Unbelievable.
thinking that he's a failure? And if you think it's confined to the arts, right? Because and he never finished a thing. Leonardo da Vinci, he has thousands of pieces. He finished less than 20. The Mona Lisa, he never finished. He repainted it over and over and over again, thinking it was, oh, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. So you think that's an artist. Okay, we can all, because we're tech guys, so they're all the same. Paul J. Dirac, probably if Einstein is the smartest guy in the world ever, then Dirac is the second smartest. So Dirac he's a physicist, he was able to combine quantum mechanics and relativistic physics, which is to this day is still the thorniest problem in physics today. But he was able to lay the foundation for that. And he, on his deathbed, said, I have fallen short. I have not lived up to the gifts that God has granted me. I could have done more. I should have been better. Can you imagine? So you need to you need to forgive yourself. Be a little bit kind to ourselves. Find those places that where you can unplug, and and just kind of turn everything off and recharge the proverbial batteries. And that small voice inside your head is not going to go away. So just the sooner you learn, the sooner you learn to live with it, the better it will be. So I know you're gonna. So I'll say this one thing about me specifically then. So in how did you sail around the world? How did you do all these? How did you do all these incredible? Pull a canoe behind you. None of that makes sense. So ask yourself, because I said I was in the army, and you talked about when you first set out, did I get 10 days out and think I was going to turn around? Now, can you imagine you have a bunch of soldiers and you say to them, your job is to jump over the jump out of the trench and charge into the machine gun. But if it gets too hard, if you think it's going to be too much, don't worry about it. Just turn around and come back. It's okay. It's like, no, there's no license to quit. There's no idea of quit. There's no idea if it gets hard, you get to stop. So my father surveying in Saskatchewan, it's the middle of winter time. I've got a pickaxe. It's literally Christmas Day. And we're out there. I'm trying to dig a hole in frozen Saskatchewan with a pickaxe so I can put an iron pin. I can sledgehammer an iron pin into the ground that marks the section corner so the well site can get put in. So my dad never got to say no, because if he said no, he'd never get a job again from that oil company. And that's it.
Yeah.
So this idea of, if it gets too hard, I'm going to quit. I think that's a bad way to frame something starting out. And I'm sure, in your mind, you were going to get in your instance, if I can put words in your mouth, you would have said, I'm going to start a pulp mill. And if it gets hard, it's like, oh, well, you know, no one said it was going to be easy.
No. But I look back at the foundation and say that what looked so difficult and so tough, still feel the hunger
Hmm.
and see too much that we should not have seen. Then the other part that I did is I wanted to prove to me
Yes.
that that I could, not to anybody else, but to
Yes.
me, that I could do it. I wanted to go with that suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and
Hmm.
then build a sawmill, even if I can't be, and have virtually no money. I did not want to take more than what I took out, and by the time I got off the bus, I had $25.47. But there was no question in my
Hmm.
mind that I would build a lumber mill. There is no
Hmm.
question that that would happen. And
Yep.
then the first I came in July. The first winter I was piling on the green chain, and
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
even then it was 25 below,
Yeah.
but we didn't stop until it was 30 below, and then a lot of the lumber was dipped into PTSD to make sure not good stuff, chemicals to make sure that the lumber didn't get moldy, and I would be soaking wet from top to bottom, and so and working 8-10 hours a day and pulling 8 by 10, 18 to 24 foot long on strips.
Hmm.
And but I was not going to stop, because even then, when it was so difficult to do in a lot of cases, then I was already building my mill.
Hmm.
So I already had that in front of me, and then, but I was still wondering, and it was not until I read this book, Driven to Distraction, that at least that part became clear to me.
Yeah.
So then, and then from there on in, it opened the door further, and then I started to write books. The first one that I did is Against All Odds, and a
Mm.
number of other ones. And so I'm going to send my books to you. I'm going to
Yeah.
sign them, and
Yes,
then.
that would.
So tell us again, where are you now? So you are just on the west side of the island. So where is it?
I live
Is it
on. I live on Gabriola, which is just
Gabriola?
yeah.
Okay, so you ever go to Victoria?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're gonna
Yeah.
have to stop by and visit us in North
Yeah.
Saanich. So I'm gonna make sure that you have our address, and then I'm there every weekend. So and I'm gonna send you my books, And so yeah.
Yeah, that would I would love that. I would love to read what you've written. That would be and there's another book that's similarly titled, but I don't think it's I think it's on a it's a different subject, so I might be confusing the two. But I would, this you had mentioned something very important, and I just want to say this very briefly, that um you realized that you were the only competition was you. The only person you're competing against is you. And
Yeah,
I learned that as an athlete. You even in professional sports today, you hear, oh, that person lost his confidence. He's lacking confidence. His performance is, well, who are you? If you're lacking, if you're lacking confidence and you're as a professional, hockey player, for example, who are you competing against? Well, obviously, I mean, the sooner you realize that you are competing against yourself, then the path forward is going to be 1,000 times, if not, three orders, four orders of magnitude easier. The competition lies well, a famous golfer, Byron Nelson, said it. Golf is played on the 4.5 inches between your ears, not on the course, not on this vast landscape out in front of
exactly,
you, but only in the 4.5 inches between you, which means you're competing against yourself all the time. And the
exactly.
sooner you come to grips with that, both the good and the bad, then the better off you'll be. And the journey to that is something that you've just talked about beautifully. And I honestly, I want to say thank you for that, because it's very, people don't often articulate that in a way that's as profound as the way that you've done it. But when and the old, I mean, everyone knows, maybe not everyone, but the adage is, physician, heal thyself, which is nothing more than you have to know yourself before you can actually go out in the world and heal anything, whether it be, your problems that you're facing or other people. So the better you get, the more you know the better you know yourself, the man, which is why we should never stop learning, because, you're, uh, there's, you should never stop reading. One of my other, bits of advice, since I'm now shooting on people, people should read more. I should say, I'll stop with that.
So the other part, Bert, I was just going to mention in closing is that the other part that I found amazing for me is that uh, the I started blogging about
Hmm.
6 7 years ago, and then gradually went into doing interviews or interaction on a local television with Shaw television station, and then COVID came. And then
Hmm.
we said, what are we going to do now? So I had this apartment in downtown Prince George. You say, let's turn it into a studio. And so we did that,
Hmm.
interviewing all interesting people from around the region, and we have lots of them here.
Yeah.
But then we were running out of candidates, and then saying, so maybe I have to set up another studio. I have an apartment in Yaletown in Vancouver, and then the more I looked at it, and saw television, and see one, two, three, four different people from different areas of the world interacting, and that was getting better all the time, and saying, let's go virtual. So we
Hmm.
did that, and then found this company, Podmats,
Hmm.
and so that bring people together, and it has been amazing. So
Yep.
now, as you and me are sitting here interacting, we've never met each other before this hour started, and we connected in numerous areas. I know we
Yep.
will be friends for a long time to come, for the rest of our lives, likely. And
Hmm.
and so it all happened during this podcast. And so now the other part about it, which is exciting, is that we already know that we're very active. You are very active on the podcasting. So we have close to 700,000 subscribers on YouTube,
Wow. Hmm.
and at least a couple of million are watching us around the world as we have this amazing interaction. And I believe it's only at its beginning
Yeah.
now. And I find it an amazing platform to interact, and I want to go further with it. In fact, develop a platform around it
Hmm.
as well. And so I'm very excited about that, and just doing amazing things. And I love it. And it's the new media, not
Oh yeah.
newspapers, not news, new.
No.
This is the new media. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, you should be, because as a tech guy, it's interesting for me to sort of understand technical evolutions. And if you look at because we just had a U.S. presidential election, there's when the first president to engage with newspapers turned newspapers into the vehicle upon which more millionaires were made than anything else. The next presidents to embrace radio, that was Roosevelt's fireside chats, turned radio into the next medium that made more millionaires and reached more people than anything else. The next presidents to engage with television, it happened to be Nixon and I think Kennedy. They had a debate on television that resulted in Kennedy's win because Nixon was literally sweating bullets, literally sweating at the time.
I know.
But that turned television into the next medium.
I did.
That so look at this presidential election. What made some of the biggest difference? It was podcasts.
Correct.
Podcasts. So if you, I mean, it's pretty hard to refute sort of the trajectory of technology and the way that people communicate ideas across vast swaths of the population. So when you say that you're at the forefront and this is happening, you're absolutely, unequivocally correct. And you don't have to look anywhere else than some of the biggest events in the world and how they're shaped by media that transforms landscapes. And there you are, sir.
I love it.
Yeah.
Bert, it was a privilege to have you on my podcast. I'm going to make sure I sign the books, and
Yes.
then let's make sure we stay in touch. And for all those people watching us on my podcast as well as Bert's, is that subscribe to our podcast if you want to see more of these interactions, which we do on ours, and Bert does on his as well. Then share it with others and support podcasting. Bert, it was a privilege, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, there was. I can assure you from the bottom of my heart, it was my pleasure and my privilege. And God bless you, sir.
Yeah, and the same to you, Bert. Take care.
Take care.